Hey everybody, in this video I'll be reviewing some novels I read this month. To start off, I'd actually like to talk about two books, Factotum and Post Office, both by Charles Bukowski. The reason I'm grouping these together is because they're part of the 5 novels of Bukowski's which essentially summarize his early life. It's a fictionalized version of his life trajectory from a very young age in Ham on Rye to older near the time of his death in the book Hollywood. So Factotum is chronologically the second book in the series. It's not wasn't written chronologically, and you don't need to read the books in order to make sense of them. They're very self-contained. But Factotum deals with Bukowski's early youth, his early 20s, traveling across America, working seedy jobs in seedy cities, trying very vaguely to be a poet, but mostly just drinking and getting in fights and being with various women. The title of the book comes from the kind of theme of the book. Factotum means someone who has many different jobs. Post Office is the next in the series. In this, Bukowski is a little bit older. He's, I think the book basically covers from his mid-30s to about age 50. In that, as you may guess, a lot of it has to do with him working at the post office and just the kind of brutal mundanity of working class existence, continuing to drink a lot, lots of different women, lots of shenanigans, going to the racetrack, lots of classic Bukowski themes in these books. And then Post Office ends with him making the decision to quit the post office and essentially succeed as a writer or die. Drink himself to death. So I was rereading both of these. I've read pretty much all Bukowski's work. I was a really big fan. I discovered it when I was about 17, and his writing style, which is very distinctly simple and stark, deals with a lot of kind of heavy, grimy side of the world, alcoholism, drug use, violence. But it's also very funny. He has this extremely understated, dry humor to him, and a really excellent, beautiful poet at times. Both, I think, Factotum and Post Office have a lot of the things that people don't like about Bukowski. A lot of people have called him a misogynist, and I think there's a reasonable case to be made for that being true, and if that's a turnoff, I certainly understand. Neither of these books really wowed me as much as they did the first time I read them. Probably that's partially a product of having read them both before. And in general, Bukowski's work isn't as amazing to me as it was when I discovered it fresh. I think that he has a lot of flaws as a writer, and I think his more misogynistic aspects of his writing are really hard to get over, especially as I get older. But I think for better or worse, his style has been extremely influential in American writing, especially for contemporary young male writers, which is, of course, the joke about Bukowski everyone makes. But for that reason, I think his stuff is worth reading. It's worth being familiar with. And it's very readable. It's a good read. It's funny. It's interesting. It's exciting. But the selfishness of the character, who is a fictionalized version of the author, and the misogynistic tone can certainly be quite divisive. And if it's not your thing, I don't fault you for it. But yeah, I would vote, rate both books, maybe 7 out of 10. I would recommend them. I think of the 5 books, like I said, you don't need to read them in order. I think Ham on Rye, which is the first in terms of the chronology of his life, it deals with his young life. I think that's the best of the 5. I'll probably in the future do a video specifically about Bukowski because, like I said, I'm pretty familiar with all of his work, including his poetry. So the next novel I'm going to talk about is Cancer Ward by Alexander Solhenitzsyn. Cancer Ward is the story of several characters being treated for cancer or working in a cancer ward in Soviet Uzbekistan. It takes place in the early 1950s, shortly after Stalin had died and the de-Stalinization process was taking place. This was essentially an effort by the new Soviet government to acknowledge some of the brutalities and crimes of the Stalin regime. They didn't acknowledge the ones that the people now in power did, but basically denouncing Stalin, denouncing a lot of his men as barbaric, and dismantling the elaborate concentration camps or gulag camps, dismantling that system throughout the Soviet Union, and changing some of the political laws, being more liberal, not liberal by our ideas, but liberal for the Soviet Union. So during this period, which was obviously momentously changing because it was, a radical reshaping of social norms and political norms in the Soviet Union, and it was the death of a man who had been revered in a almost godlike way, and suddenly he's the bad guy, he's the villain. So amidst this very big picture political drama, we deal with the intimate kind of individual dramas of various characters connected in different ways to the death of Stalin, because obviously anyone living in the Soviet Union has been impacted in a different way by these events. So there are characters who are party loyalists, who are suddenly very afraid because their whole kind of foundation of essentially snitching is suddenly collapsing. Are they going to be arrested? Are they going to get in trouble? All this stuff, their belief in this kind of totalitarian Stalinist communism is now being undermined and being rejected by Soviet society. There's characters who spent most of their lives in the camps and are realizing that things are changing now and that their lives can be different. And that's a very interesting theme of the book, of kind of comparing the metaphorical death of being exiled to Central Asia and, not being able to travel freely throughout the Soviet Union and all this stuff that comes with being a political prisoner, and then the literal death of having cancer, having your body break down, and trying to grapple with those emotions. And then there's characters who are nurses and doctors who are kind of pondering the end to the repressive bureaucracy of the Soviet Union breathing down their backs all the time, while also dealing with the very complicated morality and feelings that come with treating people who are dying and who are going to die, and trying to figure out how to extend their life. Should they extend their life? Is this making anything better? Etc. So the book really is a beautiful, incredibly well put together character drama, which also deals with a big political moment, but which, if you don't know anything about the Soviet Union and don't know anything about that political moment, you can still appreciate the story and really just fall into strong emotional resonance with the characters. Even the characters that are, horrible snitches that constructed their whole lives out of participating in the Stalinist system. Yeah, so I would summarize basically by saying I think Solhenitzsyn has written a brilliant 19th century style novel. It really reminds me of the best works of Dostoevsky and other writers of that era who could really capture beautiful character work to talk about society as a whole. But he's written it in the 20th century about a very 20th century situation, the end of Stalinism, and coupled with Solzhenitsyn's other two famous works, the Gulag Archipelago and A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, I think they give a really powerful look into the life in Stalin's Soviet Union and the life after Stalin, and what that meant to people who had spent decades living in the Gulag prison systems and living as political exiles. So yeah, I would give this book maybe an 8 out of 10. There are some parts of it that I felt like dragged a little bit, but in general, really a brilliant, brilliant book. I would highly recommend it, and I would highly recommend the Gulag Archipelago, a less fictionalized account of the author's times in the Gulag system. I think that's one of the best books I've ever read, and Cancer Ward is kind of a fictionalized grappling with the results of the end of the events that are depicted in Gulag Archipelago. So yeah, Solhenitzsyn, great writer. I know in the modern kind of leftist world, I think people have a problem with him because he's associated with Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson really likes him. And yes, this is an anti-communist book, it's a conservative book, but I don't know. I guess if you're rejecting it out of hand because of that, I would say maybe you need to broaden your perspective a little bit. And this is coming from someone who is very much a self-declared leftist. So, yeah, can't recommend it enough. Really enjoyed it. So the next book I read this month was No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. I had seen the movie before. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. Movie is excellent. I highly recommend seeing it if you haven't. And the book is almost exactly the same. I actually learned after I read it that Cormac McCarthy did write the book as a screenplay originally, which you can definitely tell because his stark, kind of no-frills writing style is even more so in No Country for Old Men. There's very little description of characters, very little description of actions. And yeah, it's a breakdown of the social order in rural Texas after a drug deal gone wrong, and there's this totally beyond evil hitman out to kill this Texas kind of good old boy, found the drug money, took it, and the old sheriff is kind of ruminating on morality that has chipped away. There's a lot of interesting kind of moments in this book. There's a lot of interesting dialogue dealing with kind of classical Christian ideas of morality and kind of Southernisms, and just like most of McCarthy's books, he captures dialogue in a really beautiful, uncanny way. But overall, I'd say No Country for Old Men is a book that was going to be a movie. It's good that it is a movie. The movie's really good. Just watch the movie. It's basically the same thing, but you get to see it visually. And, the Coen brothers directed it. It's great. If you haven't seen it, I know I'm just going on and on about it, but go see it. It's really good. It was nominated for won Best Picture. Deserved it. It's fucking awesome. So, yeah, I would say like 7 out of 10. I wouldn't really recommend it in that it's good, but just watch the movie. The movie is the same thing, but you can see it, and it's better because of that. So next I'll talk about Ask the Dusk by John Fante. This novel was written in the 30s and was a huge influence on Charles Bukowski, which is very apparent if you read it. The writing style is very similar, and the copy of it that I have was actually published by Black Sparrow Press, which is the press that was associated with Bukowski. I love their books. They look really beautiful. So if you ever get a chance to buy a Black Sparrow Press copy of Bukowski or John Fante, do it. They look great, and they even feel nice. The paper's nice. So Ask the Dusk is about an author named Arturo Bandini living in LA, trying to struggle and make it as a short story writer. In that way, it's very similar to Bukowski's work, but Fante is a lot more silly and a lot more kind of self-effacing. It's not gritty. He's not a drinker, but he's this kind of pathetic comedic character who's always talking about how great he is, and then something bad happens and he talks about how terrible he is. It's very funny. It's legitimately a very silly book. It's a quick read. The main criticism I have of it is there's a whole section that deals with marijuana addiction, and the beats are exactly like heroin addiction, and I can tell this is a product of it being written in the 30s when people did not really understand marijuana very well. But it is extremely silly to read in the modern day, and it kind of derails the whole thing. However, the last 2 chapters of the book, when it moves past the Reefer Madness, are very, very good, very impactful, kind of a beautiful, haunting ending. So it does redeem the book, but yeah, the Reefer Madness stuff is just so silly because, like I said, it is quite literally exactly how someone would write a heroin addiction now, but it's talking about weed, and it's very silly. So I would say maybe 7 out of 10. I would recommend it. It's an easy read, and it's good if you like Bukowski because it inspired Bukowski, and it's very much like his style, but not the greatest book of all time, and it certainly has not aged well from when it was written. So the next novel I read this month was And the Hippos Were Boiled in Their Tanks. It was written collaboratively between Jack Kerouac and William S. Burroughs. They each write a chapter switching between 2 characters with 2 different perspectives. The novel is based on an experience they had where a friend of theirs was, according to him, being harassed by this gay acquaintance of theirs, and he killed him. And William S. Burroughs and Jack Kerouac did not tell the police, and so later, when it came to light, they were both jailed as accomplices. And so the book is essentially that. It's about the Beat generation. They have a friend who kills a guy who is kind of harassing him, etc., etc. William S. Burroughs, I read a quote of him saying he didn't think this book should have been unearthed because it was unpublished for a long time due to censorship, and then maybe several decades later was published finally. Kind of agree with him. It's not that great. There are individual moments where the prose is very electrifying, and it really taps into this kind of seedy artistic life in 1940s New York. But mostly, I just found the characters a bit annoying, a bit self-indulgent. I thought it betrayed kind of the least romantic or exciting side of the Beat generation. I thought they came off as a bunch of whiny, self-obsessed babies. And maybe that's just an age thing. This was written 70 years ago at this point, or something like that. But yeah, in general, if you like William S. Burroughs, read Junkie. If you like Jack Kerouac, read On the Road. You don't need to read this book. It's fine, but it's not that great. I would give it maybe a 5.5 out of 10. It's okay. And to top it off, a book that I thought was better than okay is Vineland by Thomas Pynchon. This book, I didn't realize it till I looked at some reviews of it after I had read it, because I don't really read reviews before I read things, which I guess ruins the point of reading reviews. But this book is regarded by a lot of Pynchon fans as kind of his weakest effort. I've never read anything of his besides this. I liked this book a lot. It's a very, very stream of consciousness, strange, surreal novel. It deals with a lot of themes of both like kind of the collapse of hippiedom, Nixon and Reagan's war on drugs and the effect on American culture, but it also has a lot of kind of weird mysticism and like magic elements to it. It switches through time in the characters' lives really without warning, to where you're suddenly, you go from talking about someone and they're 40 years old to suddenly they're 10 years old and you're talking about their life when they were a child, and you just have to keep up. I didn't find it that hard to follow, but there are sections of this book that are so surreal and strange that I don't know what the hell Pynchon's trying to get at, and I find it kind of annoying. So I'd say maybe 25% of this book I just did not like at all. The other rest of it is quite good, and the ending is very satisfying. And I think the book has a lot to say about the impact of kind of a government surveillance state on people. A lot of the characters are lifetime professional like provocateurs who are hired by the FBI to go into radical leftist circles and stir shit up, and so they can make arrests. And I think that is a very interesting exploration of what does that do to people's psyches. How can they live with themselves? How can they still think of themselves as somehow committed to like revolution or change? And then the same thing with kind of the drug politics aspect of it, which are obviously linked. Leftist politics in the 60s and drugs were linked for better or worse, or at least they were linked in the eyes of the government. So I think it's a very good book. Prepare to be a little bit frustrated, and if you don't like stream of consciousness or surreal stuff, don't read it. Don't even go near it. But yeah, I would say maybe 7.5 out of 10. I enjoyed it a lot, despite the 25% of it, though, that I found extremely annoying. And that's it. That's all I read for this month. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. My next video, which I hope to be putting out in a few weeks, will be a in-depth review and kind of historical overlook at one of my favorite novels of all time, Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And I hope to be making some more videos like that, exploring in detail books that I think are important and which have had a big impact on me. So if you like the sound of that, look forward for that. Anyway, thank you for watching, and have a great day.